My sister Rachel was the family hero for taking care of our grandpa. After his stroke, getting up at 5 a.m. every day and sleeping at his house every night. When me and my 11-year-old brother snuck into Grandpa's house while she was at work, he jumped out of his wheelchair, trembling, and begged us not to tell her we were there. His arms were covered in bruises, the room reeked of urine, and he sobbed that she'd been starving him and blasting death metal all night to keep him awake while stealing his social security checks. That same day, we found him dead in his chair with Rachel standing over him, crying about how he'd choked on water. I was 15 when my older sister Rachel, 17, became the family hero, because that's when we found out she was torturing our grandpa Marty. It all started when he had a stroke. Our parents were already working 60-hour weeks as janitors, so when she wanted to take care of him, we let her. She'd go over to his house from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. every morning and slept there every weeknight after school too, but it wasn't long before she started burning out. I was in my room when she barged in looking for her laptop. "Where the F is it?" she yelled, throwing all my books to the floor. My sister, once the calmest and kindest girl you'd ever meet, was now red with rage. I stared at her in disbelief. "I know you fucking have it." Her knee was about to hit my testes, so I made sure to speak really quickly. "It's beneath your bed." Immediately her face softened. "Oh right, sorry for overreacting. I've just been stressed lately." Something shifted after that. Every week, Rachel had new stories about how hard it was caring for Grandpa, how he tried to hit her with her cane during an episode of Alzheimer's, called her names, refused him medications. Me and my little brother Sammy, 11, both thought she was awesome. In fact, our whole family did. Why wouldn't we? She sold the image of being a selfless teenager, sacrificing her life for someone else. So even when me and Sammy's arms were covered in injuries and bruises from Rachel's outbursts, I told everyone how amazing she was. So much so that even the teachers took it easy on her. But here's the weird part. No one else ever saw Grandpa being difficult. Every time Mom tried to help, Rachel insisted she had it under control. One time I tried to surprise her with a gift basket at Grandpa's house, but when she opened the door, she immediately slapped me across the face. "How effing dare you show up and try to stress me out? I'm already taking care of someone, go F off." I just figured she was on her period and left her alone. And it wasn't until my 16th birthday that the truth finally came out. Sammy was doing a project about family history. I tried to text Rachel about it, but she just left me undelivered. So I did what any logical teenager would do in this situation. I helped Sammy break into Grandpa's house when Rachel wasn't home. I expected to be faced with a cute and delusional old man in a rocking chair with a soft smile. But when we walked in, Grandpa practically jumped out of his wheelchair, his whole body trembling. His eyes went wide with pure terror, darting between me, Sammy, and the door like a trapped animal. "Please don't tell her you were here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't grip the armrests. When I reached out to hug him, he flinched violently and threw his arms up to protect his face. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," he cried out, cowering like we were about to hit him. The worst part was when we heard a car door slam outside. Grandpa went completely pale and started rocking back and forth. "Rachel's back early, hide, you have to hide." But it wasn't Rachel, just the neighbor. When I explained this, his face went from completely tense to zen. He even started sobbing out of relief. I furrowed my eyebrows and took a closer look at him. That's when I saw it. His arms were stick-thin with bruises up and down them. Sammy pointed out that the room reeked of urine. What he said next made me vomit. Turns out, Rachel was doing everything she could to make him look delusional. She was starving him, hiding his medications, even hitting him where clothes would cover. And for extra measure, she'd blast death metal all night to keep him awake. And I guess he noticed my confusion, because that's when he explained her motive. "She takes my social security checks," Grandpa sobbed. "If I tell anyone, she'll put me in a home where they'll let me die alone." Everything in me wanted to fall to the floor and cry my eyes out, but I couldn't, because getting Grandpa help was more important. Luckily, Mom and Dad were both home, and once me and Sammy got the words out, we all got in the car to drive towards him. But when we arrived, they found him dead in his chair. Rachel was standing beside him, with crocodile tears streaming down her face. "I just got here and found him like this. He must have choked on water while I was at work." My parents believed every word. Rachel hugged me, and I hugged her back, because I wanted her in prison, but I knew I needed a confession first. The car ride back was silent, except for Mom's muffled sobs. Rachel sat between me and Sammy in the back seat, her hand gripping mine like she needed comfort. I squeezed back, fighting the urge to yank my hand away. Every bump in the road made my stomach turn as I replayed Grandpa's terrified face in my mind. At Grandpa's house, the paramedics were already there. Rachel immediately rushed to them, her voice breaking as she described finding him. I watched her performance carefully. Her eyes stayed completely dry, even as she gasped and sobbed. The phrases she used sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in front of a mirror. Meanwhile, our parents were genuinely devastated, Dad's shoulders shaking as Mom clung to him. The paramedics asked routine questions while the police took notes. Rachel answered everything perfectly, mentioning how she'd just arrived from her shift at the grocery store. She even produced a receipt showing she'd bought flowers for him on her way over. I noticed she kept glancing at me and Sammy, probably checking if we'd say anything about our earlier visit. During the car ride home, my phone buzzed. Rachel had texted me, "Thanks for having my back, this is so hard, but at least we have each other." The heart emoji made my skin crawl. She never used emojis, especially not hearts. I screenshot the message immediately, something telling me I might need it later. Her choice of that particular emoji felt wrong, like she was celebrating rather than grieving. Back at home, I headed straight to my room, but the walls were too thin to block out sounds from the house. Rachel was on the phone in her room next door, and her voice carried through the wall. She was laughing, actually laughing. I pressed my ear against the wall and heard her clearly. "Yeah, Finally, I'm free. No more getting up at 5 a.m., no more dealing with his crap. I can actually have a life now. My hands started shaking. Our grandfather's body wasn't even cold yet. I grabbed my phone and started recording, holding it up to the wall. The audio was muffled, but you could make out her words, and especially her tone. Gleeful, relieved, celebrating. Meanwhile, downstairs, I could hear our parents on the phone with relatives, making funeral arrangements through their tears. The contrast made me sick. I saved the recording to 3 different cloud services, paranoid about losing evidence. Later, when I went to use the bathroom, Sammy was already there. He pulled me inside and locked the door, then showed me his phone. His hands were trembling as he swiped through photos. He'd taken pictures of Grandpa's bruises before our parents had arrived at his house. The purple and yellow marks were clear against Grandpa's pale skin. Some were finger-shaped, others looked like impact bruises. I knew something was wrong, Sammy whispered. I've been documenting stuff for weeks. Look, he showed me more photos, screenshots of Rachel's social media, where she complained about caregiving, always posted right after Grandpa's social security check would have arrived. There were photos of prescription bottles in Rachel's room that had Grandpa's name on them, dated from months ago. During family dinner that night, we all sat around the table in silence. Mom had made Grandpa's favorite meal as some kind of tribute. Rachel pushed food around her plate, then suddenly spoke up. I think we should do cremation. It would help everyone move on faster. Plus, it's what Grandpa would have wanted. The fork slipped from my hand. Cremation would destroy any evidence of abuse. I forced myself to stay calm and suggested, maybe we should do an open casket instead, so everyone can say goodbye properly. Grandpa had a lot of friends from his poker group. Rachel's face went white for just a second before she recovered. Oh, I don't know if that's a good idea. He didn't look peaceful when I found him. It might be traumatic for people. The funeral home can fix that, I said, watching her carefully. They're really good with makeup and stuff. She opened her mouth to argue, but Mom agreed with me, saying it would give closure. Rachel's jaw tightened, but she nodded, forcing a smile. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I noticed a light in my room. I opened my eyes just slightly and saw Rachel holding my phone, scrolling through it. She was going through my photos, messages, everything. I forced myself to breathe evenly, pretending to still be asleep. She glanced over at me, and I quickly closed my eyes fully. After what felt like forever, she set my phone back on my nightstand and crept out. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. I waited another hour before checking my phone. She'd deleted the screenshot of her text message, but thankfully I'd already backed it up to the cloud. She'd also gone through my recording app, but found nothing since I'd saved the audio file under a fake name in a different folder. The next morning at breakfast, Rachel dropped a bomb. Mom, Dad, I'm worried about the kids, she said, stirring her coffee. I found out yesterday that they broke into Grandpa's house without permission. They really upset him on his last day. I nearly choked on my cereal. Sammy's eyes went wide. What? Mom turned to us, shocked. Yeah, Rachel continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. Grandpa called me, terrified. Said they just showed up and were asking all these questions, going through his things. You know how confused he got sometimes. It probably stressed him out so much that she trailed off, letting them fill in the blanks. How could you? Dad's voice was sharp. Your grandfather was sick. You know he had anxiety. But we were just... Sammy started. No excuses. Mom cut him off. You upset him on his final day. How could you be so thoughtless? Rachel hid her smirk behind her coffee mug, but I saw it. She knew we couldn't defend ourselves without revealing what Grandpa had told us, which our parents wouldn't believe anyway. It was the perfect manipulation. At the funeral home the next day, the director pulled our parents aside. I stayed close enough to overhear. I need to mention, he said quietly, there's some significant bruising on the deceased. It's going to require special makeup techniques for an open casket service. Rachel appeared out of nowhere. Oh, that's from his falls. Grandpa was so stubborn about using his walker. The medication made him dizzy and he was always tumbling. I told him so many times to be careful. She turned to the director. Actually, maybe we should reconsider the open casket. I don't want people to get the wrong idea. I stepped forward. No, I think we should stick with the open casket. Grandpa's friends deserve to see him one last time. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check the time, but actually hitting record. You said he was prone to falling because of medication? Yes, Rachel said, not realizing I was recording. The blood thinners especially made him bruise if you just looked at him wrong. Plus, the anxiety meds made him unsteady. Doctor warned me about it months ago. The funeral director nodded sympathetically and made notes. I kept recording as Rachel elaborated on Grandpa's supposed clumsiness, each lie another piece of evidence. Later, while our parents were picking out flowers, Sammy pulled me into the bathroom. Oh wow, Rachel is getting scarier by the minute. I can't believe she actually snuck into her sibling's room at 2 a.m. to delete evidence. That's like something straight out of an effing thriller movie. His face was pale as he showed me his phone. Look what I found. Rachel posted this on TikTok last night but deleted it after like 10 minutes. I screenshot it before she took it down. The video showed Rachel in her room, music playing softly. The caption read, "Caregiving is over, my life begins, finally free, new chapter, no more burdens." The timestamp showed she'd posted it just hours after Grandpa died. The hashtags made my stomach turn. I immediately forwarded it to my email and saved it to multiple cloud services. That afternoon, Rachel posted a touching Instagram tribute to Grandpa. It was a photo of them from last Christmas, with a long caption about how honored she was to care for him and how much she'd miss him. Within hours, she had hundreds of comments offering condolences, praising her dedication, calling her an angel. I watched her scroll through them at the kitchen table, a small smile playing on her lips. She was enjoying the attention. Sammy came to me later with another discovery. He'd needed to print something for school and asked to use Rachel's laptop since ours was broken. She'd left it open and logged into her messages. He'd found an old text conversation from 3 months ago with her friend Katie. Rachel had written, written, "Can't wait till the old man croaks. I'm so over this BS." Katie had replied, "Lol, savage. But hey, at least you're getting paid, right?" Rachel, "Not enough for this hell, but when he's gone, I get everything." Sammy had taken photos of the screen with his phone before Rachel came back. The timestamp showed this was from right around when Grandpa's health had started declining, according to Rachel's stories. At the funeral, Rachel took control like she always did. She assigned me to greet guests at the door, keeping me busy and away from anyone who might have actually visited Grandpa recently. She stationed Sammy at the guest book table. She made sure she was the only one talking to Grandpa's close friends, spinning her story about his confusion and falls. But I noticed something. Mrs. Chen, Grandpa's next-door neighbor, kept trying to approach me. Every time she got close, Rachel would intercept her, guiding her away with a hand on her elbow and sympathetic words. Mrs. Chen looked frustrated but too polite to make a scene at a funeral. The next week, things got worse. Rachel called my boss at the ice cream shop where I worked part-time. I don't know what she said, but suddenly my hours were cut from 20 per week to just 5. When I asked why, my boss just said something vague about needing to accommodate family situations and that Rachel had explained I needed time to grieve. When I tried to explain that I was fine to work, he patted my shoulder and said, "Your sister told me you might be in denial about your grief. It's normal. Take the time you need." Then the school counselor called me in. She had the same concerned look. "Rachel stopped by yesterday. She's worried about you. Says you're not coping well with your grandfather's passing." "I'm fine," I insisted. "Really, I haven't missed any classes or anything. Sometimes grief manifests in unexpected ways," she said gently. "Rachel mentioned you've been acting out, making up stories. It might be good for you to take a few days off, process everything." No matter how much I protested, she'd already made up her mind. Rachel had gotten to her first. I was sent home with a note recommending I take a week off for mental health. I decided to visit Mrs. Chen while Rachel was at work. The elderly woman's face lit up when she saw me, then immediately fell. "Oh dear, I'm so sorry about your grandfather. I tried to visit him these last few months, but Rachel always said he was sleeping or too confused for visitors." "When was the last time you actually saw him?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "Must have been 4 months ago, maybe 5. I used to bring him soup every Sunday, but Rachel said it was upsetting his stomach. Then she said he was getting paranoid about visitors. But you know what's strange?" I leaned forward. "I could hear music from his house at all hours. Death metal of all things, blasting at 3 a.m. I called once to complain, and Rachel said it helped him sleep. What elderly man sleeps to death metal?" My hands clenched. Grandpa had told us about the sleep deprivation, but hearing confirmation from someone else made it real. "Did you ever call the police?" "Once, but Rachel met them at the door, told them her grandfather had dementia and fixated on loud music. They left without even checking on him." Mrs. Chen shook her head. "I should have pushed harder. I knew something wasn't right." During the reception after the funeral, my cousin Mark noticed something. "Hey, isn't that Grandpa's watch?" He pointed to Rachel's wrist, where a vintage Rolex gleamed. Rachel touched it lovingly. "He wanted me to have it. Gave it to me last week. Said it was payment for taking care of him." She smiled sadly. "I didn't want to take it, but he insisted." Mark looked skeptical but didn't push it. I made a mental note. Grandpa had been terrified of Rachel last week. No way he gave her anything willingly. That night, I created a fake Instagram account and did some digging. I found Rachel's activity in elder care support groups. She joined 8 months ago, right when she started caring for Grandpa. But her posts were weird. Instead of asking for actual support, she was always asking about legal things. What happens to estate if elderly person dies without updating will? Can caregivers be compensated from estate after death? How to prove elder was mentally incompetent. The responses were meant to be helpful, but Rachel had been mining them for information, learning exactly how to cover her tracks. At the reception, Dr. Morrison, Grandpa's physician, approached me while Rachel was distracted with other guests. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I have to say I was surprised to hear about his passing. I'd been trying to schedule a follow-up for months, but Rachel always said he was too anxious to leave the house." "When was his last actual appointment?" I asked. The doctor frowned. "Must be 6 months ago?" But Rachel kept calling in refills for his medications, said she was monitoring him at home. He paused. "Is everything all right? You look concerned." Before I could answer, Rachel appeared at my elbow. Her eyes were already filling with tears. "Dr. Morrison, thank you so much for coming. This is just so hard. All these medical questions bring back painful memories of Grandpa's suffering." The doctor immediately backed off, offering condolences. Rachel steered him away from me, but not before I saw her flash me a warning look. That evening, Mom found me in my room. "Honey, why were you interrogating Dr. Morrison? Rachel said you were asking all sorts of questions about Grandpa's medical care." "I was just curious about—" "This isn't the time," Mom said firmly. "Your sister is grieving. We all are. The last thing we need is you stirring up drama." I wanted to scream. Rachel had gotten to Mom first. Again, every move I made, she was 3 steps ahead, painting me as the problem. The isolation was working. My hours at work were cut. School wanted me to stay home, and now my parents saw me as the troublemaker disrupting everyone's grief. Only Sammy believed me, and he was just 11. We were on our own, but I wasn't giving up. Grandpa deserved justice, and I was going to make sure he got it. I just had to be smarter than Rachel, and I had to get proof that even my parents couldn't ignore. The game was just beginning. Rachel started showing up at my friend group's hangouts uninvited. She'd appear at the mall food court where we gathered after school, sliding into conversations with practiced ease. Tyler, my closest friend, initially felt awkward about her presence, but Rachel quickly won him over with stories about how hard it was dealing with family grief. Within days, she dominated every conversation, steering topics toward her supposed suffering, while I sat silently, knowing the truth but unable to speak it. I recognized the isolation tactic immediately. She was systematically inserting herself between me and my support system. Every time I tried to have a private conversation with Tyler, Rachel would materialize with perfect timing. She'd touch his his arm, lean in close, make inside jokes about things they'd apparently discussed when I wasn't around. My other friends started including her in group texts, and soon I was finding out about hangouts after they'd already happened. The smart move was documenting everything. I started recording our interactions secretly, keeping my phone in my pocket with the voice recorder running. The first few recordings captured nothing useful. Rachel was too careful in public, but patterns emerged. She'd make subtle digs about my mental state, wondering aloud if I was handling Grandpa's death okay, suggesting maybe I needed more time alone to process. My friends started giving me concerned looks, and Tyler asked if I wanted to talk about my grief. Rachel had poisoned the well perfectly. Sammy found something significant while looking for his Nintendo DS charger. Rachel's diary was tucked behind towels in our shared bathroom cabinet. He photographed every page with shaking hands before carefully replacing it. The entries were damning. Page after page detailed her resentment about caregiving duties, but not in the way someone might normally vent. She wrote about Grandpa like he was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to her freedom. One entry from 2 months ago read, "Counted his pills again. If I adjust the dosage just right, no one will notice. He's already so confused, they'll think it's natural decline." When Rachel tried her manipulation tactics on Sammy the next day, suggesting he was remembering things wrong about finding Grandpa scared, he played along brilliantly. He nodded, acted confused, even apologized for upsetting her. But afterward, he came straight to me with every detail of the conversation. She'd tried to convince him that Grandpa had been having delusions for months, that his fear was just another symptom. Sammy's ability to play dumb while gathering information impressed me. My little brother was proving to be a better detective than I'd given him credit for. I used the school computer lab to upload the diary photos to multiple cloud storage accounts, creating backups Rachel couldn't access even if she somehow got into my personal devices. The metadata on Sammy's photos would prove when they were taken, making it harder for Rachel to claim we'd fabricated evidence later. I also started a detailed timeline document, cross-referencing her diary entries with her social media posts and the dates of Grandpa's supposed incidents. The police visit was frustrating but expected. 2 officers came to the house after I'd called in a tip about elder abuse. They spoke with our parents first, then Rachel, who put on an Oscar-worthy performance. She cried about how hard she'd tried to care for Grandpa, how his death was sudden but not unexpected given his age and health. She even showed them paperwork from his doctor about his anxiety medication. Though I noticed the prescriptions were all from months ago, the officers concluded it was a natural death and suggested our family seek grief counseling. They left business cards for therapists and drove away. Mrs. Chen proved more helpful than the police. When I visited her again with Sammy, she agreed to write down everything she'd witnessed. Her handwriting was shaky but clear as she documented the late-night music, the times she'd been turned away from visiting, the strange smells coming from Grandpa's house. She mentioned seeing Rachel carrying shopping bags from expensive stores while claiming she couldn't afford proper food for Grandpa. Oh wow, Rachel is playing everyone like a master chess player. She's showing up at the mall and totally taking over the friend group, and then Sammy finding that diary behind the towels. That's huge. She'd kept a log of the disturbances because she'd considered filing a noise complaint, and those dated entries corroborated our timeline perfectly. The recycling bin held more evidence. I found Grandpa's credit card statements crumpled among old newspapers. The charges were staggering. Thousands in online shopping, all shipped to our house rather than Grandpa's. Designer clothes, electronics, jewelry. I photographed every statement, noting how the spending increased dramatically after Rachel became his caregiver. The statements also showed cash withdrawals from ATMs near our house, not near Grandpa's, suggesting Rachel was taking his card without him. Tyler's mom inadvertently provided another piece of the puzzle. She was a nurse at the local hospital and mentioned during dinner that Rachel had approached her months ago with detailed questions about end-of-life care. She'd assumed Rachel was doing research for a school project, but the questions were oddly specific about how certain medications might interact, what signs of distress to watch for, how long someone could survive without proper nutrition. Tyler's mom had found it concerning enough to mention to her colleagues, though she'd never followed up. Dad started noticing Rachel's behavior at dinner one night. She'd been needling me about my reduced work hours, suggesting I was using grief as an excuse to be lazy. I stayed completely calm, answering her provocations with measured responses. The contrast made her escalate, her voice rising as she accused me of being selfish and uncaring. Dad's eyebrows furrowed as he watched his eldest daughter's disproportionate anger over something so minor. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across his face. The bank called about unusual activity on Grandpa's account 3 days later. Rachel happened to be home and grabbed the phone first. I stood in the hallway, listening as she lied smoothly about having power of attorney, claiming she'd been managing his finances with his full consent. She provided security answers she could only have known by going through his personal documents. After she hung up, she saw me watching, and her mask slipped for just a moment. Pure rage flashed across her face before she composed herself and walked past me without a word. The pharmacy's automated system revealed another layer of deception. A robotic voice left a message about Grandpa's prescriptions being ready for pickup. Prescriptions that had been automatically refilling for 3 months without being collected. The dates aligned with when Rachel claimed she was giving him his medications daily. If she was picking up his prescriptions, why were 3 months worth sitting at the pharmacy? I saved the voicemail and added it to my growing evidence file. Family movie night provided an unexpected moment. We were watching a crime show where the plot involved elder abuse. Rachel shifted uncomfortably on the couch as the detective on screen discussed signs of financial exploitation and physical abuse. When the victim's bruises were revealed, she flinched visibly. Mom noticed and asked if she was okay. Rachel mumbled something about the show being too realistic and excused herself to the bathroom. She didn't return for the rest of the episode. Rachel's attempts to buy my silence became more obvious. She offered to pay for my college application fees, saying Grandpa would have wanted to help with my education. When I politely declined, she pushed harder, suggesting she could cover my car insurance too. Her generosity felt like a trap. Accept her money and she'd have leverage over me. I maintained polite distance, thanking her but insisting I could manage on my own. Her frustration with my refusal was palpable. Mom made an observation that gave me hope. She mentioned to Dad that Rachel seemed eager to handle all of Grandpa's estate paperwork, even offering to meet with lawyers alone to spare our parents the emotional burden. Mom found it odd that a 17-year-old would be so interested in legal documents and financial matters. She didn't suspect the truth yet, but the seed of doubt was planted. I spent hours analyzing the timeline of Rachel's reports about Grandpa's confusion. Every incident she'd reported coincided with the arrival of his pension or social security checks. The pattern was undeniable. Grandpa would supposedly have a bad episode requiring extra care right when money arrived, justifying Rachel's increased presence at his house and her access to his finances. I created a chart showing the correlation, saving it to multiple locations. The reality of our situation became clear during a family gathering. Tyler, our parents, and most of our extended family still believed Rachel's narrative completely. She'd crafted her image as the sacrificing granddaughter so carefully that questioning it seemed cruel. Only Mrs. Chen and Sammy fully believed me. Everyone else saw a grieving teenager acting out, making wild accusations born from misplaced guilt about not helping with Grandpa's care myself. The burner phone receipt changed everything. I found it in Rachel's car when she sent me to grab her purse. It was dated 2 weeks before Grandpa's death, paid in cash at an electronics store across town. Why would she need a burner phone while caring for our grandfather? I photographed the receipt and searched her car more thoroughly, finding nothing else but memorizing every detail. Sammy faced his own test when Rachel confronted him about his Nintendo DS she'd found hidden under his bed, something our parents had forbidden him from having. She threatened to tell them unless he stopped talking to me about Grandpa. Instead of cowering, my little brother looked her straight in the eye and said he didn't care about the game system anymore. That night, he told me everything, and we agreed he'd done the right thing. Some things were more important than avoiding punishment. Our brotherhood deepened through shared purpose. Sammy admitted he'd never fully believed Rachel's stories but had been too scared to speak up. He showed me notes he'd been keeping in his school planner, small observations about Rachel's behavior that seemed insignificant alone but painted a pattern when combined. We spent hours in his room, comparing notes and building our case, careful to keep our voices low. The temptation to plant evidence crossed my mind more than once. It would be easy to slip something incriminating into Rachel's room, to force the confrontation, but I knew that path would backfire. We needed Rachel's own words, her own actions, to prove her guilt. Manufactured evidence would only discredit everything else we'd gathered. Justice required patience and truth. Rachel's first major slip happened during an argument about selling Grandpa's house. Our parents wanted to wait, but Rachel pushed for immediate action, citing maintenance costs and property taxes. In her urgency, she mentioned that Grandpa had been taking his anxiety medication at specific times she'd never supposedly managed. Mom caught the contradiction immediately, asking how Rachel knew his medication schedule if she wasn't managing it. Rachel backpedaled quickly, but the damage was done. Mrs. Chen's written statement became crucial when she added more details about timeline discrepancies. She'd kept a calendar marking when she'd tried to visit Grandpa, and her records showed Rachel had been lying about his condition for months before his death. The dates when Rachel claimed he was too confused for visitors didn't match with times Mrs. Chen had seen him through windows, alert and trying to signal for help. Tyler's mom stopped inviting Rachel to family dinners after she made disturbing comments about the burden of caring for elderly relatives. She'd spoken almost gleefully about how some families were lucky when their elderly members passed quickly rather than lingering. The nurse found the comments so unsettling that she privately asked Tyler to be careful around Rachel, though she didn't elaborate on her concerns. The pattern of Rachel's caregiver stress incidents became undeniable when mapped against Grandpa's income. Every explosion of temper, every breakdown about how hard things were, happened within days of his checks arriving. I created a visual timeline showing the correlation, using different colors for different types of incidents. The pattern was so clear that even someone wanting to believe Rachel would have to question it. Grandpa's poker buddy Jim provided unexpected insight when I carefully approached him at the grocery store. He revealed that Rachel had been asking detailed questions about Grandpa's will months before his death, wanting to know if he'd updated it recently and who the beneficiaries were. Jim had found it odd, but assumed Rachel was just being practical. He also mentioned that Grandpa had seemed afraid the last time they'd spoken by phone, whispering that he couldn't talk long because she might hear. When confronted about the will questions, Rachel's composure cracked slightly. She claimed Grandpa had been getting confused about his assets, mixing up bank accounts and forgetting what he owned, but she couldn't maintain eye contact during the explanation, and her hands trembled as she gestured. It was the first time I'd seen her genuinely rattled by a direct question. Dad's apology came unexpectedly one evening. He found me in the garage and admitted he'd been wrong to dismiss my concerns about the doctor. He'd noticed Rachel's behavior becoming increasingly erratic and controlling, especially around discussions of Grandpa's estate. He wasn't ready to believe the worst yet, but he was starting to question the narrative Rachel had crafted. Rachel's web of lies began unraveling faster as she struggled to keep her stories straight without Grandpa to blame. She'd contradict herself about his medication schedule, forgetting forget which symptoms she'd attributed to which conditions, mix up the timeline of his supposed decline. Each mistake was small, but they accumulated like cracks in a dam. Jim dropped another bombshell during a follow-up conversation. His wife had been close friends with someone in Rachel's friend group who'd helped during another elderly relative's illness. That person had also died suddenly, supposedly from natural causes, after months of dedicated care from the friend. The similarities were too striking to be coincidence. Two elderly people, both dying unexpectedly after months of care from teenage girls who'd complained about the burden. I warned Jim to be careful around Rachel's friend group without revealing our full suspicions. He took the warning seriously, mentioning he'd already felt uncomfortable around some of them at community events. He promised to keep his distance and stay alert for any concerning behavior. The support network grew quietly but steadily. Sammy, Mrs. Chen, Jim, and Dr. Morrison began sharing information through careful channels. We didn't meet formally or create any obvious connections that Rachel might notice. Instead, information flowed through casual encounters and careful conversations, each person contributing pieces to the larger puzzle. Rachel's attempt to guilt-trip me about abandoning family fell completely flat. She cornered me in the kitchen, tears streaming as she accused me of being cold and distant during her time of greatest need. I maintained a pleasant expression, offering generic comfort while refusing to engage with her emotional manipulation. The more I failed to react, the more frustrated she became, eventually storming off when her performance yielded no results. Mom's discovery of Grandpa's checkbook in Rachel's possession marked another turning point. I cannot believe she actually asked Jim about Grandpa's will months before he died, and then tried to lie about it with shaky hands when they asked her. That's some crazy shit. Rachel quickly explained she was organizing his papers for the estate lawyer, but her explanation rang hollow when Mom noticed recent entries in Grandpa's shaky handwriting dated after his death. Rachel claimed they must be misdated, but doubt crept further into Mom's expression. Our parents found unexpected comfort in counseling sessions with their pastor. He listened to their concerns about family dynamics and gently suggested that sometimes grief could manifest in troubling ways. Without directly accusing anyone, he helped them process the possibility that things weren't as they seemed. His careful guidance helped prepare them emotionally for revelations to come. The bank's fraud department finally caught up with the suspicious activity. They called about unusual ATM withdrawals from Grandpa's account after his death, transactions that couldn't be explained by automatic payments or pre-authorized transfers. I managed to intercept the message before Rachel, carefully transcribing every detail before deleting it from the machine. The bank would be investigating further, creating an official paper trail Rachel couldn't control. Grandpa's house sale deadline created new pressure on Rachel. She became increasingly desperate to close the deal, making sloppy mistakes in her haste. She accidentally revealed knowledge about house repairs that had been done while she supposedly wasn't there, mentioned furniture arrangements from rooms she claimed Grandpa had kept locked, described renovations that had happened during times she said he was too paranoid for workers to visit. The family therapy session Rachel insisted on backfired spectacularly. Her rehearsed victim act felt hollow in the clinical setting, especially when the therapist asked probing questions about family dynamics. Rachel's answers were too perfect, too practiced, lacking the genuine emotion and inconsistency of real grief. The therapist's carefully neutral expression suggested she saw through the performance. I understood that getting a confession meant risking Rachel's violent retaliation. She'd already shown willingness to hurt family members who threatened her, but justice for Grandpa outweighed personal safety. I began planning carefully, considering how to create situations where Rachel might reveal herself while minimizing physical danger. My approach shifted from direct confrontation to strategic questioning. Instead of accusations, I asked innocent-seeming questions that forced Rachel to elaborate on her lies. Each elaboration created new contradictions, new details that didn't match previous stories. I documented every conversation, building an undeniable record of deception. Extended family members began declining Rachel's social media friend requests after hushed conversations at family gatherings. Word spread quietly through the family network that something wasn't right, though most didn't know specifics. Rachel's carefully maintained image was cracking around the edges as more people noticed inconsistencies in her stories. The accumulated evidence painted an undeniable picture when laid out systematically. Financial records, medical timelines, witness statements, and Rachel's own contradictions created a narrative of systematic abuse and premeditated murder. Each piece alone might be explained away, but together they formed an overwhelming case. Tyler's revelation shifted everything. He'd been at Rachel's house to return a textbook when he overheard her on the phone in her room. She was laughing about how easy it had been to convince everyone, how Grandpa had been too weak to fight back in the end. Most disturbing was her comment about enjoying watching him suffer, seeing the fear in his eyes. Tyler left immediately and came straight to me, visibly shaken by what he'd heard. Rachel's attempt to maintain Tyler's friendship through bribery revealed more of her theft. She offered him Grandpa's vintage car, claiming Grandpa had wanted Tyler to have it for being such a good friend to the family. Tyler knew immediately this was wrong. He'd barely known Grandpa and had no connection to him. The casual way Rachel offered stolen property showed how comfortable she'd become with her crimes. Tyler shared the bribery attempt with his mother, who was already concerned about Rachel's behavior. The nurse found it deeply troubling that a teenager would try to give away valuable property that should be part of an estate. She advised Tyler to distance himself from Rachel and document any further interactions. Rachel's job loss came after she missed multiple shifts while dealing with imaginary estate issues. Her manager had been patient initially, understanding that grief could be difficult. But when Rachel kept calling out for lawyer meetings that didn't exist and bank appointments she couldn't verify, patience ran out. The loss of income seemed to increase her desperation about settling Grandpa's estate quickly. My support network solidified as more people recognized the truth. Each person who'd witnessed Rachel's concerning behavior began sharing their experiences more openly. The isolated incidents formed a clear pattern when combined, a pattern of escalating abuse culminating in murder. The community center revelation was damning. Rachel had been collecting caregiver support funds meant to provide respite care for overwhelmed family caregivers. She'd submitted documentation claiming she was providing round-the-clock care for Grandpa, receiving thousands in support. But the funds were meant to hire professional help, not supplement personal income. The fraud was documented in official records Rachel couldn't dispute. I presented the accumulated evidence to our parents in careful stages, building the case methodically. Financial fraud first, easiest to prove with paper trails. Then the medical neglect, supported by pharmacy records and doctors' statements. The physical abuse came next, with photos and witness accounts. Each revelation built on the previous one, creating an undeniable narrative even for parents who desperately wanted to believe their daughter was innocent. The confrontation finally came during a family meeting where Mom and Dad demanded answers. They'd seen enough evidence to know something was terribly wrong. They asked Rachel direct questions about money, medications, and the contradictions in her stories. Her usual tactics weren't working. Tears didn't stop the questions. Anger didn't deflect attention, and her lies were too tangled to maintain. The pressure finally cracked Rachel's composure. She shifted in her chair, fingers drumming against the dining table as Mom held up the bank statements I'd provided. Rachel's voice wavered as she admitted to borrowing some money, claiming Grandpa had wanted her to have it for all her hard work. Her hands gestured wildly as she explained how difficult caregiving had been, how she'd needed compensation for sacrificing her teenage years. Dad's expression hardened when Sammy quietly placed his phone on the table, swiping through the photos of Grandpa's bruises. The timestamps proved Rachel had lied about when the injuries occurred. She'd claimed they were from falls weeks before his death, but Sammy's photos from our visit showed fresh bruising that couldn't have been more than days old. Rachel's face went pale as she realized the evidence was irrefutable. I spread out the complete evidence compilation across the table. Bank records, pharmacy logs, Mrs. Chen's written statement, screenshots of Rachel's social media posts, the diary photos, and Tyler's written account of what he'd overheard. Each piece fit together like a puzzle, creating an undeniable picture of systematic abuse and theft. Mom's hands shook as she picked up each document, her face crumbling with each new revelation. The family meeting intensified as our parents demanded the full truth. Rachel's mask finally slipped completely. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair backward, and started screaming about being unappreciated. Her arms flailed as she ranted about how no one understood the burden she'd carried, how Grandpa had been a drain on the family. When Dad mentioned calling the police, Rachel's demeanor shifted dramatically. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, holding it to her own wrist. Her eyes were wild as she threatened to hurt herself if anyone called the authorities. Mom immediately started crying, begging Rachel to put the knife down. Dad's hands rose in a calming gesture as he promised they wouldn't involve the police if she'd just talk to them. The manipulation was working exactly as Rachel had planned. Our parents wavered, their protective instincts overriding their horror at what Rachel had done. Mom suggested getting Rachel help, therapy, anything but criminal charges. She couldn't bear the thought of losing another family member, even one who'd murdered Grandpa. Dad agreed, saying the family needed healing, not more trauma. They were choosing Rachel over justice for Grandpa. The support network I'd carefully built began fracturing. Mrs. Chen wanted police involvement immediately, insisting Grandpa deserved justice. Jim agreed, saying Rachel was dangerous and needed to be stopped. But Tyler's mom worried about destroying our family, suggesting counseling might be better. Dr. Morrison remained neutral, saying he'd support whatever decision the family made. The alliance was splitting, leaving me with a difficult choice. I realized I'd have to proceed alone. My parents were focused on protecting Rachel, on keeping the family together at any cost. They'd convinced themselves that therapy could fix what she'd done, that healing was more important than accountability. But I knew Rachel would never change without consequences. She'd murdered Grandpa and would likely do it again if given the chance. The recording plan formed in my mind as I watched Rachel manipulate our parents with tears and promises to get help. I'd need to get her alone, away from Mom and Dad's protective presence. My phone had excellent recording quality, and if I could keep it hidden in my pocket, I might capture the confession we needed. The risk was enormous. Rachel had already shown she was capable of violence. 3 days later, Rachel agreed to meet me at Grandpa's empty house. She'd texted suggesting we needed to clear the air, to move forward as a family. I knew it was likely a trap, but it was also an opportunity. The house was for sale, and she wanted to do a final walkthrough before the new owners took possession. I agreed, my phone already recording in my pocket as I drove there. The house felt different without Grandpa's presence. Empty rooms echoed our footsteps as Rachel led me to the kitchen where he'd died. She leaned against the counter, exactly where she'd stood when describing finding his body. Her expression was unreadable as she watched me enter, her hands hidden behind her back. Rachel's composure remained intact as I casually mentioned Jim's wife and the similarities to Grandpa's death. For the first time, genuine surprise flashed across her face. She hadn't known I'd made that connection. Her recovery was quick, but not quick enough. I saw the calculation in her eyes as she decided how much to reveal. She started talking about the online forums she'd found, how they'd opened her eyes to the burden of caregiving. Her voice grew animated as she described reading about caregiver burnout, about the unfairness of young people sacrificing their lives for the elderly. She'd twisted support resources meant meant to help overwhelmed caregivers into a manual for abuse, finding validation for her resentment in posts from other struggling caregivers. Movement outside the window caught my eye. Sammy had followed me despite my explicit instructions to stay home. He was crouched behind the bushes, his phone raised and recording through the glass. My little brother had created a backup plan without telling me, positioning himself as a witness in case something went wrong. Pride and fear warred in my chest. The moment of choice arrived as Rachel moved closer, her intentions unclear. Every instinct screamed at me to defend myself, to strike first before she could hurt me. But I needed her confession more than I needed to protect myself. I forced my body to remain relaxed, my voice calm, as I asked the question that had haunted me since Grandpa's death. Rachel's laugh was chilling when I asked if she'd enjoyed watching him die. She nodded, a smile playing at her lips as she confirmed what I'd suspected. Her eyes lit up as she described the power she'd felt, the satisfaction of finally being in control. She'd spent months feeling powerless, trapped by obligation, and his death had been her liberation. The details spilled out as Rachel's need to boast overcame her caution. She demonstrated how she'd forced water down Grandpa's throat while he was too weak to resist, making drowning look like accidental choking. Her hands mimicked the motion, showing exactly how she'd held his head back, how she'd poured steadily despite his feeble struggles. The confession was everything we needed. Rachel's mood shifted suddenly as she noticed my hand in my pocket. She lunged for the kitchen knife block, the same one from our family confrontation. I dodged sideways, the blade missing me by inches. Her scream of rage filled the kitchen as she realized I'd been recording. She ranted about ungrateful family, about how we'd all failed to appreciate her sacrifice, how Grandpa had deserved what happened. The rant continued as I kept dodging her wild swings. She detailed the systematic abuse, the medication withholding, the starvation, the sleep deprivation. Every crime poured out in a torrent of self-justification. She'd convinced herself that Grandpa's suffering was justified by her own inconvenience, that his death was a mercy she'd granted. The delusion was complete. Our parents' car screeched into the driveway, just as Rachel was describing how she'd put Grandpa out of his misery. They'd tracked my phone location after Sammy had texted them from outside. Dad burst through the door first, taking in the scene. Rachel with the knife, me backed against the wall, Sammy filming through the window. The horror on his face was absolute. Mom's collapse was immediate when Rachel, faced with our parents' presence, dropped all pretense. She looked them directly in the eyes and stated matter-of-factly that Grandpa was going to die anyway, that she'd simply accelerated the inevitable. No remorse, no guilt, just cold practicality. The daughter they'd protected, the child they'd wanted to heal, revealed herself as a remorseless killer. Dad's hands shook as he called the police, his voice breaking as he reported the situation. Rachel didn't resist when the officers arrived, maintaining her eerily calm demeanor. She handed over the knife without protest, her expression almost serene. As they led her away in handcuffs, she turned back to look at us with empty eyes, no recognition of what she'd destroyed. The extended family and support network gathered at our house as news spread through the community. Mrs. Chen wept with relief that justice would finally be served. Jim nodded grimly, satisfied that Grandpa's death wouldn't go unpunished. Tyler and his mom offered support, having witnessed enough to understand the truth. Dr. Morrison provided his medical records to support the case. Tech-savvy Jim made the final discovery that solidified the case against Rachel. He'd searched the elder care forums she'd mentioned and found her posts under a username linked to her email. The posts detailed her planning, her research into undetectable abuse methods, her questions about inheritance law. She documented her own premeditation, creating a digital trail of evidence. 6 months later, our family existed in a different form. Rachel awaited trial after her recorded confession made any defense impossible. Sammy and I attended therapy sessions twice a week, processing the trauma of discovering our sister was a killer. Our parents struggled daily with guilt, wondering what signs they'd missed, how their daughter had become capable of murder. Mom barely left the house, while Dad threw himself into work. Grandpa's house sold quickly, and our parents donated the proceeds to a local elder care charity in his memory. It felt like the only positive thing to come from the tragedy. Mrs. Chen visited Grandpa's grave every day, leaving fresh flowers and updating him on the neighborhood news as if he could hear. Her loyalty touched our healing hearts. I began speaking at elder abuse awareness events, sharing our story to help others recognize the signs we'd missed. Each presentation felt like honoring Grandpa's memory, turning our family's tragedy into prevention for others. The audiences always sat in stunned silence as I described how a seemingly devoted caregiver had hidden systematic abuse behind a facade of sacrifice. Justice came through persistence and truth, not through the dramatic confrontation I'd originally imagined. Our family survived by facing the tragedy honestly, accepting that Rachel was beyond help, that some wounds never fully heal. Grandpa's memory lived on through the lives we'd save by sharing his story, through the awareness we'd spread about elder abuse. The pain remained, but purpose had grown from it. Finding all those online posts where she planned everything was the perfect final proof. Thanks for staying to the end. If you want more, subscribe.